Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Forward Maryland. Today is Sunday, August 9th. My name is Bill Woodcock.
And I'm Jason Booms.
And we are here today to interview Erinn Mansour, who is the Howard County Coordinator for Peace Action. I should say she is the coordinator for Howard County Peace Action. But before we get to today's guest, Jason, I have decided to wear my glasses today to look a little bit more intelligent. How am I doing?
Very Mensa, Bill. That was my very first thought when we logged in this morning.
Oh, excellent. I'm going for the Mensa look because, any way that I can foment participation in organizations that discriminate amongst non-traditional lines, I'm all for.
All right. Well done.
So yes. Why not have a bunch of people who say that we are better than you because we are smarter? There's nothing non-progressive about that at all. So with that in mind, with that not in mind, because that's not what we want to do at all. We are a great podcast. So today is all stuff aside. Today is a very serious and somber anniversary. As I was reading today in the Washington Post and a little bit today in the New York Times, I certainly encourage people to pick up the Post because the Post coverage is very exhaustive of it. But today is the 75th anniversary of the dropping of the second atomic bomb on the city of Nagasaki, Japan. And there is a wonderful article in the Post that talks about how, despite all of the media, for want of a better word, at the time, the dropping of the second atomic bomb was very unnecessary. It was not a thing that were to have reduced the length of the Second World War. And it was a true exhibition of the United States, flexing its power to punish the nation of Japan for everything it had done during World War II. And so that brings us to today's guest. Erinn Mansour is the coordinator for Howard County Peace Action. And I personally find it wonderful and amazing that she has decided to take up the cause of peace at a time when things in our world and even in our little community are very divisive and very negative. So I'd like to welcome Erinn to the podcast today. And Erinn, tell us a little bit about yourself and why did you decide to take up this challenge?
Great. All right. Well, thank you. And hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here. And I appreciate talking about the anniversary this week of the Hiroshima bomb being dropped on the 6th and the 9th is the anniversary of Nagasaki, as you said. There's a lot of great research and a great book that's out called Age of Hiroshima that gets into some of the things you mentioned about things I think we didn't realize or different interpretations of really what happened. And I think it's a good time of year. I guess it's hard to think and talk about that topic for all of us, but I think this is a good time to kind of appreciate what happened and remember the people who were lost. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about Howard County Peace Action. Like you said, I'm the coordinator of Howard County Peace Action. There's kind of well, I'm a mother of 3. I live in Howard County, and I grew up during the 1980s, so I'm going to date myself a little bit. I think we may all be similar age here, but depending on who's listening, I know some folks are younger, and I hope we can engage some younger people in this this kind of effort. We really need them, like we have them engaged on the climate issue, that, nuclear weapons and nuclear war are the other existential threat really at that scale. And I hope we can get them involved. So my context was growing up in the 1980s, which was kind of the last decade of the Cold War. That was kind of front and center in my consciousness as I was kind of becoming an adult. So I watched wars like movies like War Games and Red Dawn, which was like 1983, 84. I don't know if you guys watched those or remember those, but that was kind of my context. There was a lot of anxiety about nuclear war and war with Russia at that time. So I was justifiably anxious as a teenager about nuclear war and literally like the end of life on Earth. You know, there was actually one night where I woke up at night and I think it was thunder, but I heard a loud noise. It woke me up and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to die in a nuclear attack. You know, I think I was like 13. So I was always also, my kids teased me about being a social studies geek. So I was always interested in like government and history and social studies classes when I was in school. So that interested me. And so when I went to college in 1990, you know, that was during the collapse of the Soviet Union and changes in our kind of international relations. You know, I started to study things that interested me because I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I studied comparative politics and social change and Russian language and really enjoyed that. It was very interesting to me. And so I thought I might go into international security as a profession. I didn't actually go into work as a professional in international security, but since then I've been very interested in those topics and kind of, you know, keep an eye on them and get active when I can. When I was having children, I actually got my master's degree in international security and economic policy from the University of Maryland School of Public Policy, which is a great program. It was also a great thing for a stay-at-home mom to have kind of some of that academic time to think and talk and be with really amazing professors. So I got my master's degree and a certificate in intelligence analysis because I was kind of looking in that area. So I had 3 small children at home too, and I started attending Sandy Spring Friends meeting, which is a Quaker community with my family, and I joined the Peace Committee. And so I got to know some really amazing people working on the Peace Committee, including Betty Hoover, who's a lifelong peace activist and a community leader. She lives here in Howard County. And then I also became reacquainted with an old family friend, Jean Athey, who was the director of Peace Action Montgomery at that time. And she's the executive director now of Maryland Peace Action, which we're a chapter of that group. So I became aware of this Back from the Brink, the Call to Prevent Nuclear War campaign at that time. And I wanted to work with my local chapter on the campaign. So my local chapter was Howard County Peace Action, which led me to Steve Buff, who was the coordinator at that time. And I started attending meetings and working with other members. And then in 2019, I became the new coordinator for that group. So that's how I got to be where I am at the moment and here with you.
That's terrific. And thank you for the introduction. So I have to admit, in all of my experience with the community, which has been a little bit, I had never heard of a peace action organization before. I mean, typically, you know, and I think you and I had talked about this, you know, prior to your, you know, coming on the show about some of the churches and some of the other, you know, organizations that do peace-oriented work. So, I mean, what is Peace Action about, and like locally in Howard County, like what are you guys, you know, what are you guys working on right now?
Okay, great. Yeah, I think there was some activity a few years ago, I think around like the Iran nuclear treaty and that policy. There was a little more activity in the area about kind of getting active to talk to our congressional representatives about that issue. Each of the peace action groups kind of sets their own agenda to some degree in alignment with kind of the values of peace action, national and Maryland. And they kind of go in ebbs and flows of activity to some degree. So recently we became a little bit more active. So I'll just kind of mention my goals and kind of how it relates to peace action a little bit. I was attracted to Howard County Peace Action because kind of I share the goals and priorities of the other members of Peace Action Maryland and the National Peace Action Group and lots of other peace activists as well, where we just kind of believe that it's not a suitable response to conflict to go to war, and specifically the threat of nuclear weapons, you know, is really just incredibly dangerous and upsetting. And, you know, the United States has the resources and a responsibility both to protect the United States and also provide for its people. Peace Action's one of the largest grassroots peace networks in the country, and they organize grassroots campaigns like writing campaigns and internet actions, lobbying and direct action to promote peace and changes in our policy that would make us a more peaceful place. And so again, each of our groups kind of has some autonomy in setting what they want to focus on, depending on what's going on around them and the members and what they choose to focus on. Currently, as kind of coordinator of Howard County Peace Action, I'm focusing on kind of building a community in Howard County. I'm sorry you didn't know about Peace Action, so I'm really glad that now you do. And I hope that you and anyone who kind of gets a chance to watch this checks out our website. You can just Google Howard County Peace Action and we'll pop up. And we have a Facebook page too, if you want to keep in touch with us. We have a little bit of information there and lots of links to other pages that are really helpful. So again, I hope to build a community, like you said, with individuals, faith organizations, businesses, civic leaders, and elected officials to try to set some priorities and connect to the larger community beyond Howard County, like Maryland Peace Action and Peace Action National, and all these national groups who are supporting some of these initiatives we're working on. I also kind of want to create some forums for learning and discussion and sharing knowledge about these threats. It's a hard subject for average people to kind of probably get into. I mean, I've always been kind of interested, but when you start talking about nuclear weapons and kilotons and policies about first use, it's kind of challenging for average folks. I think sometimes to feel like they can kind of understand the issue and engage on that issue. So but really there's not much to get like a basic kind of sense of things and talk to some really great experts who have some solutions and policy suggestions that would make us a lot safer. So I think that if we could have some discussion and sharing locally, people will get a lot more comfortable talking to their representatives about the things that we're working toward that would really make us a lot safer with some very basic, very important policy changes. So I hope we can share some ideas and come up with some effective solutions and influence our decision makers to change our policies, both our military spending and our nuclear weapons policies. I also think that spending time with peace activists for me is really uplifting, and they're passionate, knowledgeable, kind of hardworking people who are really sensitive, and my spirits are always kind of lifted, and I feel more hopeful when I spend time with them. So I think that even if you think it's kind of an intense subject, I think peace activists are really great people to spend time with.
I think it's an awesome subject, and I think anything that helps reduce the churn in our society, and God knows we have a lot of it, I think that's a good thing. And I guess that's where my next question comes, and then I'll defer to Jason, which is this. I mean, there's so much stuff going on now. There's the pandemic. There is whatever the president tweets. There is race relations. There is the economic downturn. So, in building an organization, any organization, and one here, I won't say especially, but, in this county, building any sorts of grassroots organization, how do you convince people to kind of pull themselves away from those things? Because even though, I mean, I may think, and I may agree with you that the threat of nuclear annihilation still is pretty high and still is very terrible, people are so concerned now about health issues and economic issues in their own households. How do you get people to think about these international things that maybe they can't get their head around otherwise?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's obviously the question we're all really struggling with right now. I definitely had that feeling. I'm a legislative aide also for Senator Clarence Lamb. So between January and March, I'm pretty busy during the legislative session. So I was intending to kind of get into a lot more of this effort to kind of work on our Back from the Brink campaign, which I'll talk about in a minute. But in March, we had to wrap up early because of the pandemic, and I had to deal with trying to help my 3 kids who are now home do e-learning and deal with all the new protocols about getting to the grocery store. And, it's been really hard to absorb and keep up with what's been happening, obviously, just personally at home myself too. So I kind of put things on pause a little bit with Peace Action, partly because, we were all reeling the last few months. So I certainly understand if people are feeling overwhelmed and it's hard to get involved, especially in a new organization that maybe you weren't already involved with. I would say a couple things about that. First of all, you mentioned that nuclear weapons policy is important. there's actually a group called the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which was founded by, it's a publication and an media organization that was founded by Albert Einstein and actually Robert Oppenheimer, who was on the group of scientists who created the atomic bomb. They have this bulletin that sets what's called a doomsday clock. And the doomsday clock is kind of a metaphor and a presentation. They actually have a physical clock, like a face of a clock. And each year for the past, I think most of the 75 years, they've kind of given an estimate of how many minutes from doomsday or a global catastrophic event the world is based on their analysis. And this is scientists and security experts, kind of the top folks who would make those analysis, get together and do a threat assessment essentially and say, we're this many minutes before midnight. Right. During the height of the Cold War in 1953, it was set at the lowest at that time of 2 minutes before midnight. And then after the end of the Cold War, kind of went up to, I think, 10 minutes. The furthest it's been is about 17 minutes. In January 2020, they had their assessment and they set us at the closest to midnight we've ever been at 100 seconds to midnight. So we're in the 2-minute warning as far as the experts of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists feel, which puts us obviously at grave risk, and there's very little margin of error in this area for us for making decisions about nuclear weapons, and the risks are essentially at the highest they've ever been, according to this group of experts, as of January 2020. So unfortunately, we're having a kind of a perfect storm of really terrible world events that we're having to kind of all deal with at once. So I would say that I hope that folks kind of take this into consideration. The United States has also abandoned some critical arms control agreements, such as the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, and they're refusing to renew the START Treaty, which, these have been kind of the fundamental components of keeping us from having an arms race. So we're basically in a phase where we're starting a new arms race, which we cannot afford. So that leads to my second thought in terms of how people can integrate this into kind of what they're already worried about and working on. We can't afford a new arms race. So the new Congressional National Defense Authorization Act has authorized $1.7 trillion to replace our entire US nuclear arsenal and with new and more deadly weapons. And we cannot afford this. So I think that's something most of us can relate to, where we're all trying to figure out how we're gonna deal with our state and local budgets, federal budgets in terms of the cost of the pandemic, both from a public health perspective and from an economic, depression kind of perspective. So I think if people aren't quite compelled by the kind of urgent state of international affairs and assessments pertaining to our nuclear threat, I think maybe people can think of it in terms of we're all tightening our belts and trying to figure out where we're going to come up with the money we need for basic services and education and public health. Well, $1.7 trillion being spent on nuclear weapons, I think personally, and I would hope I have some support, and I hope we can find more folks who want to advocate for this, that money could be reallocated and spent differently to fund public health and social needs and economic needs that we have that are really urgent. So I think also in terms of the racial injustice issue that has come up recently, I would say that that also ties in. I won't get into too much detail here, but if you learn about it, there is a connection there. And I was watching one of the clips today with Martin Luther King talking about nuclear weapons. There's an event tonight, actually, that Maryland Peace Action's hosting. That's a virtual event tonight at 7, called A Discussion of the Connections Between Black Lives Matter and the Atomic Bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, by Vince Intondi. And if you go to peaceactionmd.org, they have an events page, and it's on there, and you can register and sign up and attend that. I'm going to attend it, and I'll know a lot more later about how to articulate that particular point. But there are definitely connections there between racial injustice, imperialism, and a variety of other kind of components that are connected. And so that this is not just an independent activity; it's actually connected to our crises pertaining to the pandemic, the economic crisis, and the racial injustice issues. So that's kind of how I would.
That particular item tonight sounds amazing, and I hope to be able to participate in that. Jason.
Hello. Actually, I'm glad. I'd like to take you back a little bit, and maybe we can spend a moment talking about history and comparative politics, because that was definitely very much in my wheelhouse. I spent a fair amount of time talking about throwawaits for a teenager in the 80s. I just find it just absolutely fascinating from a, as you mentioned earlier, talking about some movies or talking about TV shows. I mean, it was so much a part of the culture. The day after, in the UK, there was Threads, and I guess technically speaking, that miniseries World War III, which is that David sold Kathy Lee Crosby vehicle
Oh
everyone
my
wanted.
God, where it started in Alaska.
That's the one. And we went from that level of mindfulness about the being fraught with risk with nuclear war occurring to the 90s. I remember I was a pollster, and we would often ask people, what's the most important problem facing America today? And you were lucky if foreign policy topped out at 2%. Why do you think that there was a sense of collective amnesia? I mean, yes, the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Soviet Union, but the weapon still existed. What do you think flipped the switch for a lot of people where it just fell out of the public consciousness?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. I'll do my best. You seem to know a lot, which is awesome. I'm going to have to check out some of those movies and shows. I would say like a couple things. Certainly in the Cold War, the post-Cold War period where there was a democratization, and I think there were a lot of international treaties. There was a huge drawdown in the number of nuclear weapons. There were about 30,000 warheads at one point. And they, through treaties and a lot of work over those decades between the 90s and up till the 2000s, it dropped to about 15,000. Now it's still 15,000 warheads, but there was a significant drop. So I think there was a sense to some degree that we had treaties in place and we were working, and there was a really big, talented infrastructure in Russia and the United States of brilliant people who were working on that kind of process of downsizing our arsenals, and the threat level was lower. There seemed less intensity in the Cold War, in terms of a conflict, at least between Russia and the United States, which is what most people kind of think of as the nuclear threat. So I think that to some degree made people think, oh, well, I think we're good, and nobody really wants to think about nuclear war, and it's a pretty horrific thing to think about. So unless it's something that really seems like a pressing need to do something about on a regular basis, I think, it's pretty easy to push it out of the consciousness if you think you can get away with that. So I think then what happened was a period of kind of slowdown, and we didn't get rid of all of our nuclear weapons. The United States has about 6,000 warheads, and so does Russia. And there's about 15,000 around the planet, and about 9 countries that have control of those for the most part. I think people have not realized the kind of unfolding and evolving risks. And I think, I don't know if you've seen the Lebanon explosion that happened recently. It was, as far as I know, it was not a nuclear explosion. It wasn't an attack. That everything that seems to suggest at the moment that it was kind of criminal negligence on the part of the government, that they confiscated 2,700 pounds of ammonium nitrate, which is an explosive, or it's a fertilizer, but it explodes, and there was a fire that started. And if you watch that, when I saw it, my feeling was like when I was 13 and had that scared feeling of like a nuclear bomb went off, because the way it was positioned by the port, it sprayed water, and the shock waves are videoed by different people. So it looks like a nuclear explosion. And actually it's about 2,700 pounds of explosion, which is kind of like a 2.5 or 2.75 kiloton explosion, which is like a low yield nuclear weapon. So if you watch that and you think about it, that wasn't a nuclear explosion, but if you had one, that's what it would look like at a low yield level. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were about 15 and 20 kilotons. So when you watch that film footage, that's the level more than what happened in Lebanon. And then nuclear weapons exist in anywhere from like 0.3 kilotons up to like 1.2 megatons. I'm not classified, so I don't know how high that goes, but huge. I mean, massive. They could blow up like a country now. So, I mean, when we're talking about warheads, it's kind of an insane level of destructive power. So I think we're trying to get it back on people's radar, because again, like the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists have pointed out, we're in the 2-minute warning in terms of, we've already had some very close calls with accidents because we have hair trigger alert status on many of these warheads. It's not unlikely. We're getting really, it's kind of scary. And so I feel like it's really important that we spend some time and get more people kind of aware and educated, and really make an effort to get our local legislators to get involved. And I don't know if you want to talk about it now, but at some point I'd like to talk about the Back from the Brink campaign that we're working on with Howard County Peace Action and other Peace Action chapters to basically kind of lay out some policy changes that we really want and work with our local leaders to bring that to our national leaders to try to make changes in our national nuclear weapons policy.
Sure. And I definitely would like to ask you about the Back from the Brink programming, because I think this question might lead into that quite nicely. Because I took a look at the doomsday clock as well. I saw we were 100 seconds away. And that just took me back, because nowadays, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we became inundated with this information, all this intelligence, these treasure trove of information we're digging through. And we know that there have been so many near misses, even when the governments, detente, post-detente, even, and when you had adults in the room. Now, granted, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. We saw that from the best and the brightest in the Kennedy and Johnson years. But nonetheless, a lot of the foreign policy establishment, at least in the Reagan administration, seemed like they were responsible adults working to find, some solutions. And as we, uncovered, that the president himself had a commitment to reform in that regard, even though he was positioned as somewhat of a cowboy when he ran for office. I guess my question is this: we know of events where Soviet commanders made decisions, sub-commanders made decisions not to launch because they thought they were getting faulty information. And there's one incident. I'm curious if you wanted to speak about it or not. Able Archer, 83.
Yeah, there are quite a few examples which are really, horrific. That one I don't, unfortunately, off the top of my head, recall.
Oh, sure. Well, I go down the rabbit hole of YouTube very, very often. So
unfortunately, there's quite a lot of examples, which is really disturbing. But go ahead.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And again, it just goes to a point where we were very close to the brink. We were engaging in a war games, essentially, in West Germany. Our movements were being followed very closely by the Soviets, and they just basically had a grid which indicated, okay, if action X were taken, is that a sign that the Americans are about to launch? And they were filling a lot of their charts. And I guess one of the key steps is they were waiting to see if there was a transmission of intelligence between Secretary of Defense, I believe it was Cap Weinberger at the time, to the president, which never happened because they decided to sort of end the war game where they had it. Had it elevated, something bad might have happened. So, and again, it's just these very close events taking place that, had human judgment gone the other way, could have resulted in nuclear annihilation. Yeah. So against that backdrop, and think about where we are now in the foreign policy establishment that exists now, this administration in particular, does that 100 seconds seem about right to you? Should it be more? Should it be less? I mean, what are your thoughts? And can you tie that into the Back from the Brink?
Sure. Yeah, and just to follow up on your examples of some of these near misses, it was on there. I'm not sure if it's still there, but there was they show a Russian roulette on the Union of Concerned Scientists website, which is related to the atomic bulletin. And it has, you can basically turn it and it gives you several, up to like 20 or more examples, just similar to what, there was one where there was a training tape that got started kind of like war games where they still don't know what happened, but they almost went into a position where they thought there was actually a nuclear exchange starting. And then something about somebody dropping a wrench down a tube and it set off some sensor on a hair trigger alert, nuclear weapon that was starting the process of launching. It's crazy stuff. So there's some examples if you're interested in kind of getting concerned about this. There are some crazy examples to show how dangerous our posture is at this point. In terms of the Back from the Brink and the policies and the current state of things, I would definitely say that I defer to my amazing scientists and security experts at the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists and Union of Concerned Scientists, that yes, I think that that's probably an accurate assessment given what I've been watching on the news and the way that things are. And then now this new nuclear arms race and our withdrawal from some of these treaties that have been helping to keep us safe. And then an administration where I heard on the news, I think recently this week, there was some discussion about the president not reading his briefings on intelligence or defense, and that they've been scaling it down from a briefing to 3 bullets, and then he didn't read those, so it was 2 bullets. So we're down to he can read a couple bullets. But obviously, we're having trouble sometimes getting our head around some of these concepts. It takes some thought and effort, and there's been a lot put into it in the past to keep us from these mistakes and accidents turning into actual nuclear events. So it doesn't happen by default. It happens with a lot of work by a lot of people. And right now, it's definitely concerning to me and I think the community of scientists are concerned, and that's what that 100 seconds is about, that they're seeing the current state of the administration, the practices of that administration as very dangerous. I would definitely agree that we're inside the 2-minute warning, and we should all be alert to that there's very low tolerance for errors here now, and we're at a very high risk status. In terms of Back from the Brink, the Call to Prevent Nuclear War is a campaign that I got involved in about 2 years ago. I was working with my friend Jean Athey, who is, again, our executive director of Maryland Peace Action now, and she was the director or coordinator of Peace Action Montgomery at the time. And she had a peace forum actually that I attended. It was great. I learned a lot, and got to actually hold a Nobel Peace Prize in my hand. My picture, I'll post it. The ICAN group, which is the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, won the Peace Prize in 2017 for their work to abolish nuclear weapons. And there's a campaign going on with them, and then they've got a lot of countries that are ratifying this treaty and trying to move in that direction given the state of things. So Back from the Brink is a grassroots campaign that I've gotten involved in, and I'm supporting and doing with Howard County Peace Action, which is trying to basically address the need to change 5 kind of critical areas of our nuclear weapons policy. So we're trying to we're trying to create kind of statements and resolutions at a local level, and there's hundreds of organizations that are involved that have already done this, and dozens of counties and municipalities and groups that have passed resolutions and statements at the local level, their county councils or their town councils, basically stating their support for these 5 principles of changes to our nuclear weapons policy that would make us safer, and asking those local leaders to send that statement to their congressional leaders and encourage them to pass legislation or work with the administration to change these nuclear policies to make us safer. And so the 5 key changes that are included in these resolutions that our draft resolution includes would be to first renounce the option of using nuclear weapons first. Second, to end the sole unchecked authority of any US president to launch a nuclear attack, which addresses some of the concerns that we talked about here currently. Also take US nuclear weapons off hair trigger alert, like one of the examples on that Union of Concerned Scientists website of dropping a wrench down a tube should not set off, an event of nuclear war. And canceling the plan to replace the entire US nuclear arsenal with enhanced weapons, which currently is in the 2020 budget, and it's what the administration has approved. It's $1.7 trillion over a period of 30 years that we're going to be spending on replacing and increasing our nuclear arsenal. In addition, he's focused on low yield nuclear weapons so that they're easier to use, and they're going to be more strategically used, which just increases the chance that we're going to have a nuclear exchange if he thinks it's small enough, or someone thinks it's small enough to use strategically on a battlefield. We've now kind of opened the Pandora's box, since so far the US is the only country that it's dropped nuclear weapons during a time of war. But if we start using small, like what happened in Lebanon, kind of small or bigger, up to 50 kilotons, it's small. So I don't want that. I don't think most of us want that. And then the 5th point in the policy changes would be pursuing a verifiable agreement among nuclear armed states, so the states that have nuclear weapons, to eliminate their nuclear arsenals, which has been part of our promises from the beginning regarding non-proliferation. But I think, that's something we need to recommit to, especially given that we're pulling away from some very important treaties and heading for what could be a very expensive and dangerous arms race again.
Mm. Actually, so I'll kick it over to Bill in a second, but I do have 2 quick follow-ups based on the question she just asked. So in terms of checking presidential authority, I want to say it was during the Nixon administration, towards the end, when his focus was a bit different, that perhaps it was suggested that any unusual orders from the White House be channeled through the Defense Secretary Schlesinger, perhaps. What are your thoughts on your organization on checking the president's authority regarding having that authorization? Who else would play a role in that process?
Right. Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Yeah, there were some bad things happening with Nixon where he was drinking a lot at the end of his administration when
Yeah.
things were going badly.
Yeah.
And so some folks around him, and he was saying some pretty scary things. And so folks around him were kind of going, if he actually does something, what are we going to do? And so, yeah, they had a plan to try to stop that if that happened. No system should be dependent on a Secretary of Defense or someone trying to stop the president from executing basically a legal order to launch, or try to save us from that kind of situation. And so again, the ending the sole unchecked authority of the U.S. president is addressing that issue. And there's a couple proposals from experts who are much more knowledgeable than I am, but I do know that one system in place already is that the top 6 folks in line for the chain of command in terms of an emergency are tracked. And they're able to be contacted. So going down from, the Speaker of the House, and, I don't know the series off the top of my head, but you have 6 folks who are tracked through GPS on a regular basis to make sure if there's an emergency, you can get to the next person in line. And you could use that system to have a series of either the top 3 or a certain number of those folks who are required to make a decision to launch, and that you could reach them immediately and locate them immediately and say, unless they agree to launch, you're not going to launch. Also, the option of first use, if that policy were in place, that would also affect your ability to launch, immediately, because unless you have a declaration of war, there's a couple proposals in Congress that have been proposed about either requiring congressional authorization for a declaration of war before you could use a nuclear weapon, or just blanket saying we won't use weapons first, which some of the countries have those. And that would, I think, be very helpful. And of course, if all the countries had that policy, maybe we'd be a little bit safer. So I'd say that, yeah, there are some systems, and I couldn't say specifically who I'd put, but it might be the Speaker of the House and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or, several folks who would have to basically concur with a decision to use a nuclear weapon, given the fact that it could start a nuclear exchange that would end the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So like the proposal, and I just the one other question. I'm really sorry. I find this fascinating. But in terms of state actors, and I think, to your 5th point, and having signatories on this, would this also include non-declared nuclear powers? I'm not sure, for example, if Israel is declared or South Africa is declared. I mean, so would the focus also be on getting everybody who does in fact have nuclear weapons, and we know they have nuclear weapons, to get them to admit it and participate in this treaty?
I mean, as far as I know, I think it would be hoping that we could get everyone we could to sign the treaty. They've made a lot of progress, but of course, at this point, it's mostly countries that don't have nuclear weapons or have considered having nuclear weapons and decided not to pursue that over the decades for different reasons. And then there's some states, like you mentioned, that are kind of in this ambiguous state where we're pretty sure they have nuclear weapons. They aren't maybe out of the closet, or they've made various statements about how they'll use them. I would certainly hope and wish that we could get everyone to agree, just like we do with landmines and chemical weapons and a variety of other horrific weapons that we've agreed are not okay. They're immoral. They're not weapons that you can use safely and protect a civilian population. Nuclear weapons, in my opinion, would qualify. And, in terms of like Hiroshima, where, 90% of the casualties were civilian, so if you're going to have a weapon that has a 90% civilian casualty rate, I think you can make an argument, which ICANN is making, that that's not a weapon that can be allowed, and that we need to eliminate them. And so I would think that we would get anyone who's able and willing. I mean, obviously we know some states that are not, and the U.S. currently is not willing to do that. So I think we need to move our own country the best we can, and then obviously hope that some other countries will come on board. But if we make it more of a problem to have, to be producing, for example, in the U.S. illegal weapons, if it passes and is ratified by the majority of UN members, our contractors here making nuclear weapons would be producing illegal weapons. Mm-hmm. So that would change things. So I think that's where that group and some folks are heading, that they're not happy with where we are, and they feel that we need to go in that direction.
Yeah. Very good to know. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Bill.
Yeah. So, by the way, for the viewing and listening audience, I would just like to remind you or let you know that when we're talking about things, because obviously this is something that we all know a little bit about, 1,000 kilotons in terms of a nuclear bomb's capacity, 1,000 kilotons is 2 million pounds of dynamite. So the explosive capability of 2 million pounds of dynamite is a kiloton. And so a megaton is 1,000 times that. So when you hear us talking about kilotons and megatons, understand what we're talking about for those of us who have forgotten the lessons we learned during the 1980s. And I will throw in, incidentally, one more TV show called Special Report, Jason, where Charleston, South Carolina was held hostage by nuclear terrorists. So Erinn, I'd like to bring this a little bit more. We have about 10 minutes, so I'd like to bring this a little bit more down to the scope of Howard County. We had spoken about the Back to the Brink effort. Is there a specific resolution that you would like for the Howard County Council to act on? Is there any motion or movement that's going on in Howard County to act on this? I mean, I know when I saw your website, I saw that Tacoma Park was, for example, one Maryland jurisdiction that has taken action on the resolution. What please inform us a little bit more about Howard County and where do people stand and where do people not stand?
Sure. Yeah, well, thank you for asking me about that. So we do have a draft resolution, which is similar to the one that was passed by the Montgomery County Council and the ones that have been passed around the country, which are variations on the same 5. Most of them contain the 5 principles, although they don't have to. If you wanted to include 3, you could. It's your own resolution. Each chapter is doing their own. But the idea would be that you're trying to include those key 5 steps, if you can, to nuclear policy changes in your resolution, and then kind of make it relevant to your community. So our draft references some of the key kind of points we've talked about in terms of military spending and the 1.7 trillion that we're going to be spending, and then make it in terms of dollars that are coming from Howard County. You know, how much are we spending on our taxes for this this stuff? And if we don't want to do that, we have a right to, and we need to elevate our comments to our elected officials. So we have a draft. It's got our key points and why we think it's important, and the 5 key elements we think that our local Howard County Council and hopefully County Executive Ball would agree to, and that could be proposed by any member. We did have a great meeting with Council Member Liz Walsh in December, and she met with us for an hour and a half and was asked great questions. And Steve Buff was there, and my friend Sandra Michaels and Gwen Du Bois of the Physicians for Social Responsibility, who are very active in this movement, and Gwen is great. So we met with her, and at the end, she said she was willing to sponsor the resolution, which we were really excited about. Like I said, I was a little busy with legislation during the winter, and we were trying to get in touch with as many local groups that might be interested in Howard County, like church groups or, you know, ecological groups, environmental protection, climate change. Anybody who's interested, we're working on that. Then the pandemic hit, when I would have been kind of wrapping that up and going back to Councilmember Walsh and trying to move to the next stage of getting support from some other council members. And we've been trying to get a meeting with County Executive Ball, but clearly everyone has been struggling the last couple of months to deal with kind of the onslaught of issues that are going on. So we kind of paused a little bit to wait and let things settle down a little bit. As soon as we're able and it seems appropriate to those council members, and whenever any groups or individuals who are interested in this topic want to get in touch with us, you can go to our webpage through the contact page and get in touch with me. My email's there, and we have a Facebook page. So anybody who's interested and wants to join us with this resolution and sign on and get their members and their folks to engage with us and to go to meetings with their constituent council members, you know, we would really love your help. And I appreciate this opportunity to reach out to people about that. So that would be the next step. And I think there's a little bit of a complication here. We certainly can do all of our work remotely, so there's not a technical problem there. It's just that obviously there's a bandwidth issue where, you know, our council members and our county executive obviously have their hands full at the moment. So we're trying to be patient and respectful to let them kind of address it at their own pace. But as soon as they're able, we would love to meet with them virtually or talk to them on email or get their input and hopefully support for a resolution, which would then go in front of the county council at some point. I believe Councilmember Walsh seems willing to sponsor it, and then we would need the majority of the members to pass the resolution of the council. And I don't think resolutions actually require the county council's signature necessarily, but obviously we're hoping. I would love to have all 5 members and the county executive be be happy to sign the statement that really just talks about sane, nuclear weapons policy and elevating that to our representatives in Congress to please make that a priority.
Sure. So I certainly appreciate your position and that you're trying to get something passed through the council and signed by the executive. I'm not going to speak for Jason, but as I've said many times, I suspect that he and I are of one mind about this, which is that the council could certainly do more in terms of showing their commitment towards justice. So I guess what I'm curious about is it's awesome that you've shown the resolution to Councilmember Walsh and that she's favorable towards introducing it. But I'm also curious about what other council members in Howard County have you talked with, and maybe there are plans in place, and what sort of reception have you received?
Yeah, we've definitely reached out to, I believe, most, if not all of the council members. We were kind of working on the ones that our members were constituents for first. So I'm actually, Councilmember Walsh is my representative. And so we went to her and then we're very excited that she seemed interested in sponsoring it. I think we also had a conversation with Councilmember Young's staff, and they were receptive, although they didn't, weren't able, it wasn't with the council member herself. So they took the information. And then the other members, we've tried to get with them and with the county executive to kind of get their feeling on their thoughts on what we're proposing and whether they're on board with that. And again, we just haven't been able to connect with them to get a meeting or discuss it further. And I didn't want to press them. I know that they're really struggling, I'm sure, right now with all the things on their plate. So I'm hopeful that at some point soon, we'll keep reaching out, and the information's on our website. And certainly if any of the council members, or if you're a constituent of any of the council members and you're interested, please contact us, and we're happy to try to work with you to set up a meeting where we'll come with you. If you don't have to know a lot, if you're just interested in all we've said and kind of agree generally with what we're talking about, I'm happy to help, or we can bring some folks with you to come to a meeting with your representative, or try to get a meeting and get them on board. So I think that's what we're working on at this point.
Well, as one of Councilmember Jones's constituents and being very close to Councilwoman Mercer Rigby's district, I in fact am a little bit concerned that there hasn't been more movement by either of their offices. I guess that I get everybody's busy. All three of us here work, and we're all busy too. And it's very good to be deferent to that. Everybody has many, many priorities, but it's also been several months since this has been going on. So I would urge, and I'm going to use this platform to urge because it's my platform, that the other council members, get with it and, make this a little bit of a higher priority. And I'm going to continue to stand on my soapbox while I defer to Jason for any remaining questions he has.
Thanks. Good point. And yeah, same thing, Deb. Come on. I do want to go from Howard County to globally. Well, I do want to go from Howard County to globally for a second. Thinking about non-state actors, state actors, where do you think the greatest nuclear threat currently exists?
That's a great question. I mean, I think we've got it coming from all angles at this point, which is part of what makes it scary. And I think that's part of what's brought our threat level, on the clock, the doomsday clock, to 100 seconds, which is, I think those experts are seeing, threats from all angles. I think there is some potential for loss of control. Like the situation in Lebanon, it's not this wasn't an atomic weapon that was set off. I'm not aware that Lebanon has access to atomic material. But there are a variety of states who either have them, or either overtly or don't admit to them, or may get access to them. Unstable governments that have access or control over those kinds of materials and weapons, if there's a dramatic change in that situation, then it's scary to figure out, how they're going to control those. Like the situation in Ukraine when they, left the Soviet Union and there were nuclear weapons in Ukraine, and that situation had to be addressed quickly, and they managed to do it without a conflict. But the idea that you would have, a Soviet republic break from the country and have control of nuclear weapons and have a debate about whose they are and who's using them or controlling them, opens up the problem of either being stolen, and then used for whatever purposes, or just the government losing control or having an incident, because it takes a lot of time and effort and control to keep them safe and make sure they aren't used just by mistake. And then, the threats in the current administration and statements with North Korea and the situation with Iran, there's certainly a lot of indicators there that there's potential, at least with this current administration and the current president, that he wants all options on the table, and that makes all these things quite possible in a way that is very dangerous. And so I'm not sure that I could assess completely what the most likely risk is. I think one risk that's kind of new that worries me personally is that this $1.7 trillion upgrade in equipment maybe moving from what is somewhat of an archaic kind of manual system with keys, kind of like war games. I mean, I'm not in the establishment, so I'm not sure all the systems they're using, but I think it was, and kind of to some degree is still controlled by human beings and physical keys and things like that. I think some of the upgrades we're talking about maybe making some of those decisions more digital and getting a system in place that may be more vulnerable to things like hacking or errors or AI kind of related concerns. So that worries me a little bit, because to be frank, I'm a little more comfortable with the fact that human beings have to turn keys, that may not, if they are not compelled that it's a real situation. Maybe that makes them nervous. They won't do what they're supposed to when they're supposed to launch, but I would rather they don't. So, for me, I think that's the concern I have with that investment and upgrading to a digital system that might have new cybersecurity risks that we haven't had actually as much before.
Yeah, all things being equal, I think that human judgment, at the end of the day, probably is the best possible alternative, as long as we, adhere to reason, and as a means of avoiding nuclear conflict. So, thanks for your perspective on that.
Sure.
As a great near-ending line in a movie, I'm sure all three of us know, would say, perhaps the best move is not to play.
Good job.
So. Erinn, I know I wanted to give you another opportunity to please promote anything that, your website, and, please make mention again of the event going on tonight. I hope to be able to participate in that, like I said, but this is your time for, as we like to say here, shameless self-promotion.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much for that. There is an event tonight and if you go to peaceactionmd.org, which is the Maryland Peace Action website, there's an events page. And on the events page, if you scroll down, I think it's the last one, is an event that's discussing Black Lives Matter in relation to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And there's we have a speaker, and I think we'll all be able to learn a lot more on that topic. So I hope you'll check that out and attend if you can. And then in terms of this week, I think you've already mentioned, and I'm glad you did, in terms of this week being the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's a good opportunity, I think, for all of us to just kind of remember the lives lost and the threat that represents, and the fact that the United States is the only country who's dropped nuclear weapons during a time of war and on a civilian population. That was as many as anywhere from like 150 to 220,000 people died within the first 3 or 4 months of either the initial impact or radiation. There's a lot that all of us can learn from that event, and a lot of things that are different interpretations now than there were over the last few decades, and certainly in the first few decades when it was a lot of classified information. So I would definitely encourage folks, if you have a chance or would like to read The Age of Hiroshima and participate with our Howard County Peace Action group and kind of a book club of, because it can be kind of intense or complex content, and it's always helpful to talk through with friends. So if you're interested in reading some of those, it's a collection of articles by scholars on Truman's decision to drop the bomb and kind of context for that, and whether he even knew that they were civilian populations. There's some debate whether he thought that was a military target, like more purely and kind of the road that led him there, where it was less of his decision than people might think, and a variety of things. So I would definitely take this as an opportunity to remember those who were lost, and to try to think through what happens in a nuclear war and our current posture, which is very dangerous and I think requires our attention. If we can manage it, I'll be available to help with that. And we have Howard County Peace Action has a website. It's peaceactionhoward.wordpress.com, or if you just go to Google and do Howard County Peace Action, it should pop right up. And we have a few pages with some information about us, and some links to the Back from the Brink website, which is actually preventnuclearwar.org is that website. And then also peaceactionmd.org is the Maryland Peace Action website, which has lots of information. And if you want to learn about this, some really, I think it's very interesting. And, a certain healthy amount of scared is okay. We try not to, you do have to pause sometimes so you don't get overwhelmed. But I think it is definitely worth some attention. And I hope that folks will engage with us to try to work on getting this Howard County resolution to show our local commitment and to give our support to Montgomery County, who's already passed this resolution. They're the first county in the country actually to pass it. Most of them were municipalities. Baltimore and DC also have resolutions they've passed that are similar. So we have local friends, and Maryland's in a unique position too, because if there is a nuclear exchange, Maryland has a variety of military sites, and we're near DC. Maryland could potentially be gone, or poisoned to the point of, gone.
I can remember all too well one of my fraternity brothers' maps that he had up on his wall in college, and Erinn, you can relate to this. That he used to have a map of the Russian missile targets in the U.S. And suffice it to say that the Baltimore, Washington area would be vaporized. But there was I believe a kiloton reserved for Howard County. And it happened to be right at the location of my current place of business. So, which is APL. Anything that supports the defense infrastructure. Now, granted, that was 35 years old, but I would highly doubt that, if anything, God forbid, were to happen, that this entire metropolitan area would become basically glass because it melted. So, it's horrible and it's horrific to think about. And I'm really glad we had this conversation today, because I think we get very, very, very wrapped up in the here and now and in the immediate. And Trump showing up at his golf club in New Jersey talking about ending Social Security and welfare, and Joe Biden this and that. But I think what we've all done very well today, and you especially, Erinn, is talk about the threats and the perils that affect our society still today. And we can't forget that. We can't forget that we are on an international stage and we are the superpower, and there are other powers that will destroy us if given the chance. And we will destroy ourselves if given the chance. So I really thank you for bringing that to us today.
Well, thank you for having me. And yeah, I hope we can get some of the energy and the folks who are who kind of brought us around to some degree in the last decade about climate change to realize that this is connected, which is our Earth is also very dependent on not being nuclear free of any kind of explosion or any material, and that it won't take much from one of these extremely powerful weapons to ruin any progress we do make on climate change. And it can happen in a matter of minutes rather than decades. So I hope that we can work together to try to reduce these risks. I think we can do it. And I hope folks join us after this.
Well, thank you. Jason, anything you have to say in closing?
Nope, no concluding thoughts here. Covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this has been a very far-ranging conversation, a lot more than I thought, but also a lot better than I thought. I feel like we're actually a Sunday morning show, which is terrific. So feel free, guys, to stay on the line after we log off. But For Jason Boones, my name is Bill Woodcock, and I thank you for listening or watching to today's edition of Forward Maryland. And I hope you have a great day and a great week, everybody. Take care.